what's going on, everyone? Clocked it here. So, I was going to do another video, but I thought it was just good timing to get this one out. So, before Metroid Prime 4 releases, I just want to get this across. Now I'm not a Metroid channel. I've played too many games in my life. I love too many games to simply focus on just Metroid. But at the same time, if I went through my channel, I've probably done more videos on Metroid than any other game, and more videos will continue to come. Just like this one here. At the same time, I've been a Metroid fan since Metroid 2, Return of Samus on the Game Boy, which I got on the Game Boy back in the early 90s. And I actually remember seeing the cover art in Toys R Us and thinking, that game looked cool. Then after that, I got Super Metroid on the SNES. Actually, do you know what? That's a lie. I never owned my own copy of Super Metroid on the SNES back in the day. I actually borrowed it a number of times off a friend. But, basically from Metroid 2, I've been a lifelong fan. And I've played every game in the series, although still to this day, I have yet to complete the original Metroid on the NES.
Shame! Shame! Shame!
Unless you count Metroid Zero Mission, which I don't, as it's a different game in so many ways, I feel. But over the decades, being a Metroid fan, you start to realize that you're part of a small but passionate crowd of gamers who consider this series to be one of, if not the best series of games in the Nintendo catalog. You also realize that after Metroid Other M, you didn't get a brand new Metroid game, in a series until like a decade later, and this is even worse for the Prime series. You all do realize that Metroid Prime 3 released in 2007, right? Which means we have waited damn near 20 years for a Metroid Prime 4. I'm 44 years old now, as a recording of this video, and that's nearly half my lifetime between Metroid Prime games. So when I see the discourse over the internet about early impressions from websites and YouTubers moaning about one specific character, who most likely won't be in a game, for long, acting as if this one character alone is going to ruin an entire Metroid Prime game, personally, I'd politely ask you all just to be quiet. Politely. Wait till the game releases. Fully complete it, then provide your reviews. Because 20 years is the time scales we've been playing with when waiting for a new Metroid Prime game to come along. And if you want to cry some more, Metroid Fusion, Metroid 4, came out in 2002. And we didn't get Metroid Dread, Metroid 5 until 2021. Watching the last 7-minute trailer of Metroid Prime 4, Beyond, should have reminded you all that there are no other games on the market like the Metroid Prime series. There is no other character on the market like Samus Aran. No other games allow a series of game designs to be woven so perfectly together, with the character and the game elements. A game where you are in first person and third person. A game world that has puzzles which require you to take something from here to there, whilst using your character's unique skills like turning into a morph ball, for combat, for movement, for puzzle elements, platforming, all seamlessly moving between first and third person at the press of a button, anytime or anywhere. Nothing scripted, yet the game design, the game is designed to accommodate, both with ease, that few other developers could even come close to achieving. This series also has, a swinging mechanic as well, which can also be used for combat and puzzle solving. Especially like Prime 3. Your weapons are used for a variety of things in various ways, not just for shooting enemies, along with your suit upgrades, new abilities, your gunship, or in the case of what we've seen in Metroid Prime 4, your new Akira bike, the Viola, where, I've seen people moan about the desert looking barren and empty. I mean, it's a desert for the start, right? This is what deserts are like, but, did you truly believe that the developers, Nintendo and Retro Studios, let me just repeat that. Nintendo and Retro Studios would let you travel this region with nothing at all to do. And guess what? This new trailer shows that there will be plenty of things to do in this little hub world junction, as you're driving around. We can debate all day, that the new way Nintendo has shown off Metroid Prime 4 Beyond has left much to be desired. I get it. We all love a good epic trailer and also wish Metroid Prime 4 had one, because I need this game to sell. We all need this game to sell. One of my latest videos was all about the desire for Nintendo to push Samus Aran as a character, outside of her power suit, more in the forefront in both marketing and within the games. But here we are in a reality. I think this last 7-minute trailer does a very good job of showing off what this game will be about. I done a video many moons ago about how Prime 4 didn't need to be revolutionary. It just needed to be bigger and do more. And when I say bigger and do more, I just mean in terms of its complexity with its power-ups, evolving those things, with new physics engines and stuff like this. Do you know what we're seeing here? We're seeing the universe of Metroid, the evolution of what Prime 2 started in motion, and then what Prime 3 pushed hard. We also, we absolutely need the Metroid universe to grow beyond Samus Aran alone on our abandoned planets and spaceships. I don't think people realize how important this is for the series to grow. We can debate the execution of how these things are implemented, but at the same time, we have to realize that everyone will look at them differently. I have my gripes with how they approached, Metroid Other M, narratively, but there are others who loved it. And if you watch the trailer back for Metroid Other M, as a Metroid fan, you would realize how exciting that game looked. It wasn't until we actually played it through that we could then make an informed decision on what the game was. This is no different from Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, but even based on what we've seen, I just can't compute the reaction to this game's previews. Perhaps I'm a biased Metroid fan, or perhaps I look at this game and think, holy crom, this is the best looking game Nintendo has ever made. We can clearly see that they've pushed a serious budget into it. The characters look absolutely stunning, and in my opinion, the best looking characters graphically to come from Nintendo, or in this case, Retro Studios, just once again showing that they are the big raw talent under that Nintendo umbrella, pushing their systems to the max, something they've always done, whilst keeping performance rock solid. The environments in this game, the art style, honestly, do we as Metroid fans even need an epic trailer, to know what a Metroid Prime 4 from Retro Studios on an HD Nintendo machine is going to be like? I was begging for Prime 4 on the Wii U, because the use of that gamepad in so many ways would have provided a level of creativity in line with what the Wiimote and Nunchuck brought to corruption. Regardless of your personal viewpoints on both Metroid Prime 2 and 3, they both, in many ways, pushed well past what the original Metroid Prime delivered to us gameplay-wise and in other areas, which effectively makes them better games in so many ways. But for the record, Prime 1 is still my personal favorite, and that mostly only falls down to Talon 4 itself. Perhaps a video for another day, perhaps. We want and need Samus to be interacting with other people and beings. They have delivered some of the best moments in Metroid history. And you have to realistically ask yourself, how much further can Samus go with only interacting with herself every now and then? Or just like every now and then, just speaking to a computer AI, giving instructions on where to venture next. This was rife in Metroid Fusion. People talk about isolation. You were talking, to Adam on a computer every save point, nearly every elevator and stuff. There was just so much dialogue and communication in that game, mixed in with classic Metroid. And do I really need to go into the reasons why we're seeing these newer Federation soldiers, helping with tutorials into how the game plays, not acting like we haven't seen this before, like in Prime 3. I've already described how unique Metroid as a series is gameplay wise. We also need to be honest here. No one buys Metroid games. And once again, when I say no one, naturally I'm exaggerating. But as I highlighted before in a previous video about Metroid Dread, and even with the sales of Metroid Prime Remastered, this series did not have the sales take up as other Nintendo series. Prime and Dread, during the Switch era, both, in my opinion, should have sold at least 10 million each. In my opinion, because both games are at the top of their fields. You have to ask yourself, how many developers have come close, to Metroid Primes? There's only so many times that Nintendo will try to push this series through multiple re-releases before they give up. Hell, like I said, we've had to wait, damn near 20 years for true sequels, to these games. And Prime 1, 2, and 3, were released on GameCube, Prime 1 and 2, Nintendo Wii, you can play them backwards compatible on the Wii U. They were also on the Wii U, eShop. We've had Prime Remastered. How many times can they push Metroid Prime to try and get this series to sell if you're not buying the first game, which many consider to be the best? I just find it just staggering. These companies see that people don't complete these games, and it's not because the games are inherently hard, but because they are so unique and require so many things from the player gameplay-wise, as they are the fusion of many genres. Yet this fusion, once understood, will demonstrate that the Metroid series is on another level. Level design. Nintendo probably saw this with Namco when they were rumored to have, initially taken on Prime 4. But, Nintendo pulled the plug and gave it back to Retro Studios. Sometimes there's only one or a very few studios, capable of bringing certain IPs up to a certain level, a Nintendo level. And regardless of Retro Studios' slow output, each one of their releases have been a straight up banger. With me saying multiple times that something like Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze is, in my opinion, the greatest 2D platformer ever made. I think the game is just immaculate in every way. I honestly believe, most of the people, moaning about these things are people who have either, barely played the series, or if they are Metroid fans, they're a very specific Metroid fan. Very specific Metroid fan. Or even if you're a Metroid Prime fan and you're moaning about characters and voice acting and stuff, did you even play Metroid Prime 3? You know, I can say straight up right now that the character interactions that we've seen in Prime 4 just absolutely blow away Metroid Prime 3. Although, you know, I still thought that the voice acting and the character interactions were pretty good in Metroid Prime 3. You know, and they're moaning about Miles McKenzie. You know, this character who, like I said, do we even need to discuss why he's possibly being added in, you know, most likely the beginning of the game? You know, people struggle to understand these games. You know, they really do. And there's just no way in hell that they're gonna have this character in the game, you know. So, I mean, for the entire game, you know. So before Metroid Prime 4 releases, you know, I'm requesting for everyone to relax. You know, trust what has come before from the studios involved, and trust what will come after. You know, Retro Studios have never missed. And I don't expect them to start now. You know, given the hardware that they're working on this time, you know, and clearly the budget that they're getting, you know, we can see it in all the trailers. You know, regardless of how those trailers are pieced together. You know, Prime 4, from what I can see, has every potential to be the best Metroid Prime game ever made. You know, and when I say something like that, you know, when you say something like that, you know, think of what has come before. You know, if you're going to say Metroid Prime 4 is going to be the greatest game ever, you know, you got that greatest Metroid Prime game ever. You know, maybe the greatest Metroid game ever. You know, think about what came before. You know, for many, Metroid Prime games are straight up 10 out of 10s. You know, and what? You know, you're going to throw that away because of some early previews from often suspect gaming media moaning about a most likely temporary NPC. You know, if Ocarina of Time released today, you know, these would be the same people who would say, you know, don't bother, you know, with the game. You know, it's not a true Zelda game. You know, or it doesn't have, you know, that the freedom of Zelda and the loneliness of Zelda because it has, you know, in quotations, an annoying fairy named Navi throughout the whole game. But, you know, funny enough, I do remember people moaning about Navi back then, and I just never understood it. She was your companion, you know, and she did help. She helped in so many ways. But, you know, Prime 4 is going to be something special. You know, this is a lifelong Metroid fan signing out, you know, absolutely ready for the next mission. Thanks for watching. I will return shortly with another typical video for myself. But yeah, I can't wait for Prime 4. We're nearly there. But yeah, let me know how you feel. Thanks for listening. Take care all, and peace.